Hey everyone, it's Chelsea with Savannah Wren Studio, and today is our monthly discussion on how yoga can be applied to our daily lives, especially as a parent, also known as Messy Yoga Mom. And, for July, what I had wanted to talk about was how we all need connection to feel supported. And, this goes not only for connecting with our children, connecting with our partners, but also with our friends and family, and that need for human interaction or interaction and connection on a deeper, more emotional level. I read a book last year called Lost Connections by Johann Hart, and it was a really profound book for me. So one of the main things that he talked about was that in our modern world, with all the technology that we live in, especially with social media, we tend to be a very isolated society. Now, that may seem counterintuitive to the fact that the purpose of social media is to give ourselves wider connection, and we are more involved on the internet than ever before. But the idea behind the book was that we are losing that intimate connection in our daily lives, especially in person. And so it's this idea that, yeah, we're connected online, but we're not getting the same type of fulfilling connections in person that we used to have 20 or so years ago. And he relates this to a lot of our mental health struggles and emotional health struggles that quite a number of us really struggle with on a daily basis. And this includes everything from depression and anxiety to issues within relationships, not being able to talk to one another efficiently or effectively without starting arguments constantly when we don't agree. And also this idea of just, that constant anger that, a lot of us can feel, and especially when you are hiding behind a keyboard and a computer screen or a phone screen, we tend to act very differently than we would if we were in person, and we're losing that in-person connection, especially with the pandemic added on top of it. And, I just wanted to connect this to, how this affects our daily lives and what we can do to work through some of our issues with lost connections. So, story time. I have always been a pretty solitary person. I honestly prefer to spend a lot of my time alone, and so becoming a partner and spouse, and then having two sets of twins, I don't really get the amount of alone time that I prefer or seems healthy for my own mental recuperation from burnout. because, when you're a parent and a partner, you're really with at least one person constantly throughout your day. And for me, that's can be very overwhelming. Even when I was a child, I spent most of my days, when not at school, out horseback riding by myself and spending hours and hours and hours in my imaginative play. And I spent a little bit of time with my parents, but the vast majority of it was spent alone, or occasionally with friends on the weekends if they came over for a sleepover. And so I'm not used to having constant contact all the time. And so there's a lot of times that I struggle myself with an overabundance of connections, which then causes, burnout and feelings of touched out, like I had touched on last month. But I've also noticed that I do have a tendency, when I feel depressed, to extreme isolate myself, whether it's doing so in my bedroom or wanting to be alone and going on a walk, or sitting outside disengaging with everyone. And I thought that was just me trying to reset myself, and in many ways it is. But when it drags on for months and months and even years, where I just constantly am isolating myself and not reaching out to the connections that I do have and that I do cherish, I know that there is a significant issue for me. And so I spent a lot of time over the last 5 or so years really trying to figure out what was behind that extreme isolation, where I would cut people off or not reach out to them as much as I used to. And a lot of it came down to the fact that when I'm depressed or in pain and suffering, one, I don't want people to see me like that. It's a vulnerability issue. I have always been seen or felt like I was the strong one, and so I didn't feel like I could be vulnerable, that it would change people's opinions of me in a negative way. The other issue that really popped up was that I struggle in general with friendships anyway. And because of my being on the spectrum, I have a tendency to struggle with concepts of time, which is really hilarious given that I used to be a historian. But, I could go 6 months or a year without talking to someone and then be like, oh crap, I haven't talked to them, and they're supposed to be one of my really great friends. And I feel incredible shame and guilt about not talking to them, despite the fact that I really, truly love them. But I just literally spaced out on the amount of time. For me, a lot of times, it feels like time moves extremely fast, even when I'm bored, and that, that can be a symptom of being a workaholic and dissociating a lot to try to get through the day. But there's times that I just literally do not realize how much time has passed since talking to someone. And so that's a huge struggle for me, because then it feels awkward trying to reach out to them and be like, hey, I haven't talked to you on the phone in 6 to 9 months. How are you doing? And it feels incredibly awkward trying to almost rebuild those connections because I lost time. The other side of the spectrum issue is that, I struggle a lot in many ways to get and develop what I believe are authentic connections. I have a long history of masking, and not only masking because I am autistic, but also masking because I am afraid of being ridiculed and attacked and abandoned and being viewed as other. And so, a lot of times I would try to match any and all people, and there's a lot of inauthentic connections that feel authentic until I am actually being myself, or I or I say something that goes against what I've said before, or I struggle with social cues and I don't read them very well, and so that causes frustration and issues and blow-ups from other people. So it feels like to me, not only do I just struggle in the modern environment that the world lives in with this lack of in-person connection, but I have that added layer of how do I get those authentic connections when I already struggle with it. Do you know? So, that's where I am. I try a lot harder nowadays, within the last 3 years or so, to really cultivate and nurture the connections that I do have. It's a lot easier when the connections are closer in proximity to me, because then I can easily see them on a weekly or monthly basis. But it would be nice to also nurture those connections with people that aren't aren't physically close to me. And it seems like that is difficult for a lot of us. Now, in Hart's book, he is going into not only mental health and emotional health, but he, also states that it's connections that helps us heal, whether it's a support network or a supportive family, supportive friends, but, supportive professionals in your corner that can help us heal the vast majority of the struggles that we face. Everything from depression and anxiety to addiction and trauma. And that was one of the really big things that drew me to that book, because, as many of you know, I was originally a historian of the First World War, and I focused a lot of my work on the mental health of soldiers and the bond between animals, hello Koba, on the battlefield, and their subsequent veteranization over the course of the 20th century. And I took that background, I took that background in history and mental health and emotional health and animal welfare and parlayed it into my current business and career goals by focusing on trauma-informed yoga, meditation, and other healing modalities through shadow work. And one of the biggest pieces of advice that I constantly come up to with regards to trauma and addiction and healing is that connection is so important that we can't do it alone. We have to have a solid support network to help us feel safe, feel secure, and feel stability in our lives. That way we have the space to work through our trauma, work through our addiction, work through our mental and emotional health, and grow from that and transform ourselves over time. And that's really been one of my goals, is I want to make sure that my business is there to be a support anchor for anyone that wants it or could benefit from it. And there are so many places where you can go to dissociate, to distract yourself from this hard shadow work, but there's not very many places that you can go that will hold space for you, sit with you through your struggles, and help you work on building that connection and that connective support network. And I hope that Savannah Studio can be one of those places for you. You might, be kind of wondering, here I am sitting outside in my backyard, or why am I sitting in my backyard? The main reason that I came out here rather than doing it inside is it's like 75, 80 degrees in August, and I wanted to be outside. I haven't been able to, kind of sit in my backyard for a while, so I wanted to soak up the sun and all the plants that are growing right now. And, I also kind of wanted to show off this little guy. I call him a little guy, but he sure as heck ain't little. So a large portion of my yard is currently taken up by this guy. So this is a giant pumpkin plant. And it originally started as a tiny little seed that, so as you can tell from the video, I have 2 giant dogs that like to dig in our yard. And we have a composter that you can probably see behind me. It's a little rotating, it's a rotating composter. And, you know, we compost using it, and then if we're not using the compost for the garden or for filling pots, we use it to fill in the holes as a way to try to get the grass to grow, and so that I don't fall over and hurt myself, because I am incredibly klutzy when it comes to walking through the yard. And one day we looked outside and there was a tiny little pumpkin plant growing in the middle of the yard. I didn't plant a seed, seeds there. Will didn't. It was leftover from last year's Halloween pumpkins. And so we were like, well, let's just watch it grow. We'll water it and we'll nurture it. What are you doing, goof? And, just see what happens and where it goes. Maybe it'll survive and maybe it won't. And over the course of the summer, it has grown to an epic size. I mean, it's so large now that we actually have to mow around it. So it's this weird island of pumpkin plant in the middle of the yard. And, we take care of it. We water it twice a day. We look at the flowers and see, do we have any pumpkins growing? We currently have like 4 little baby pumpkins growing, which is fantastic. But, all of this is to say that this giant pumpkin plant is really, in my mind, a metaphor for connection. So this pumpkin plant, and it's really huge. I mean, you can't really see because we're sitting on the ground, but it's, 6 feet across and probably 20 or more feet long. And all of it stems from one pumpkin seed. And so in my mind, that one pumpkin seed that starts all these connections, all these branches, all these vines and little baby pumpkins is you. Your connections in this life start as that little tiny pumpkin seed. And over time, as you're nurturing yourself and you're growing and you're taking care of your health in all of its forms, you start to branch out and reach out, and you start growing more and more connections, spreading out, taking up space, blooming, producing beautiful fruit of your labor from working with people and gaining more and more connection. And it's through those connections that not only are you nurturing yourself, but you are also growing and producing some of your greatest work. And so I just wanted to, bring you to see this giant pumpkin patch that we currently have, because it's really been important to me to watch it grow and just see all of the connections that the pumpkin needs to sustain itself and do its natural work over the course of the summer. And before I sign off for today's Messy Yoga Mom workshop on connections, I just want to talk really quick about, how do you develop those connections? Because, so for some of us, it's really easy to make acquaintances, but we can easily craft those smaller, immediate connections, but it's those longer term, deeper emotional connections that we struggle with. So, what I tell myself and my clients is that you have to nurture connections. You have to nurture relationships. You have to put in time and effort into them. But just as the roots nurture the full plant, the outer stems bring water back to the roots. And so connections have to be a two-way street. If they're a one-way street where you're putting in all of the effort or they're putting in all of the effort and it's not equal or pretty equal, it's going to be draining and it's not a sustainable connection. And so just as we do with gardening, you've got to make sure that you're creating a good environment for those connections to thrive and survive. Making sure that you are reaching out, you're trying to make time for each other, you're trying to see each other in person, or if that's not possible, talking in person via Zoom or Skype or on the phone, something beyond sending a quick text or commenting on their Facebook post. There has to be more to it than just those throwaway actions. And a lot of times that's really hard, given how hectic and chaotic and rushed our life can be as adults, as parents, as partners. And so it's really about prioritizing. Do you want to prioritize connections, or do you want to prioritize other things, or do you have to prioritize other things? And 3 years ago, I made the conscious choice that I wanted to prioritize my connections because I was tired of being lonely and feeling like I was isolated in this world. So you got to prioritize, you got to make time, you got to put in the effort. But now you might be saying, well, where do you find the connections? And there's a lot of different ways you can do it. In the past, my husband was a source of helping me find connections through people that he liked and kind of dragging my butt along. Other times, I find connection through my work and my personal hobby interests. Or through my kids' connections, through their school, through the community, as part or a extension of my relationship with my children. And other times it's just me literally being like, I'm going to just throw myself out there. I'm going to be vulnerable, and I'm going to be my authentic self. And if they like me, they like me. And if they don't, they don't. And I'm not going to worry about it. And that last one can be a real struggle for me, because I've spent so many decades being afraid of rejection and abandonment, and for being viewed as weird or crazy or an outlier. And I just, at some point, I had to embrace who I was and be okay with not being everyone's cup of tea. So, to recap today's workshop, connections are important for our mental and emotional health, and in some ways our physical health. You can lean into cultivating and nurturing connections by being vulnerable, being your authentic self, and by putting in time, effort to prioritize the connections that you have made. So that's all for now, and I will see you next month. From all of us at Savannah Wren Studios, including Juno and Koba, my brats of dogs, just like that. We'll see you next time. Bye.